So, hello and welcome to our panel discussion for tonight, which is called Nuclear Future, Utopia or Nightmare. Do the benefits of nuclear energy outweigh the risks? This panel discussion is presented by the Academy for Responsible Research, Teaching and Innovation, short form is RT, at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, KIT. I am Katharina Linnepe, and well, in my role as a cross-media journalist and a curious mind, I'm very excited to moderate this participatory panel. Participatory panel means this panel will be streamed on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure you're watching on YouTube right now, and you will have the chance to pose your questions and discuss with us through comments on YouTube or via Twitter and email. You will find the information on that, how to communicate with us below. And we will gather your questions and bring them in at certain points during our discussion. For that, please bear in mind, this will be a controversial yet rational and of course respectful discussion. Yeah, so this will be a rather broad discussion, also represented in our guiding topic for tonight. The point of departure for our debate is Germany's phasing out of nuclear power after the accidents in Fukushima Daiichi in 2011. And while the phasing out decision is settled, the dispose question for nuclear waste is still unsolved and still highly topical, also regarding the impact on future generations. And also the legal debate or the financial debate is still ongoing and unclear. So as you can see, it's a rather broad topic and it has many, many touch points, multidisciplinary touch points for our discussion. And so it is rather many faceted, what we are talking about tonight. And that's what, our discussion should be as well. It should cover a range of rational argumentations and ethical controversies between the extremes, utopia and nightmare. And same variousness goes for our group of panel participants for tonight, which I will present to you in a couple of minutes. But first of all, I would like to introduce to you a little play with words that we put in our subheadline for tonight, a participatory panel, as I said, and we put the word arty in bold. And this is why. ARTI is the institution within KIT which is responsible for the idea and organization of this panel. And we can see two faces here now, two very important persons at ARTI. First, the project leader, Professor Dr. Raffaela Hillebrand, and the managing director, PD, Dr. Alexander Bagatini. Hello, Raffaela. Hello, Alexander. Great to have you here. Hi. So the name ARTI stands for Academy for Responsible Research, Teaching and Innovation. Raffaela, you are Professor for Philosophy of Technology and Science here at KIT and the person responsible for ARTI. Could you tell us what is the mission of ARTI and the idea behind these words that I've just presented, responsible research, teaching and innovation?
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. I think the name ARTI already reveals it already to some extent. So responsibility is really our overarching theme. ARTI's mission is to foster more responsible research and innovation, and we aim to embed a certain mindset and expertise already in teaching students really early on in their studies. So I think it may also be important to mention how we understand the term responsibility at ARTI. So for us, for ARTI, this is an at least twofold term. So first, we have a responsibility for broader societal ecological impacts of one's actions, of one's research, one's innovations. So these impacts may be unintended, they may even be unforeseeable. And second, we have a responsibility to foster that we want to foster at art is it also embraces a responsibility to act, a responsibility to change, or maybe to shape the world we live in. So with Arti, we want to encourage, enable, for example, innovation in the first sense of responsibility that I just mentioned. And we want to shape the role models for good scientific practices and so forth. And maybe another aspect, what I would like to mention is that our approach is always bottom up. So our stakeholders are very diverse. There are students, university staff, from professors to early career researchers, as well as the broader public. And bottom up for us means, amongst other things, that we provide different formats for the different target groups. So Arti offers, for example, classical teaching on ethics of technology. We will offer full online courses and, of course, memberships for our academy. And I think one example for this variety of different formats is this evening's panel on the civil use of nuclear power. Well, a debate where ethics is central, may it be when we ask about obligations to future generations or when we ask how to balance different risks.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting, and sounds like a variety, as you said, of very interesting topics. So you hold 2 PhDs, one in physics and one in philosophy. I think I'm correct with that. Yeah, and one of your research focuses on the ethics of energy. So there are many, many points of interest for our discussion tonight, I think. What do you expect from this discussion?
Yeah, I think that currently the debate, not only on nuclear, but on the ethics of energy systems quite broadly, is at least cut short. So, but meaning that all forms of energy, it may be nuclear, fossil, and even renewables, all come with their own pros and their own risks. So it is about somehow balancing these different risks. And in my experience, and I have lived and worked abroad most of my adult life, I think recognizing or accepting these kinds of shades of ethical gray, meaning that not one energy technology is all good or all bad, that seems to be particularly challenging in Germany. And I think the public discourse on nuclear shows this very lucidly. So I hope that the discussion this evening can convey some of these shades of gray, and that it can make clear that there's no simple answer to a complex challenge like shaping our energy future. And I think this is very important, because I think acknowledging this, so these shades of gray, that there's no simple answer, is at least an essential prerequisite for a rational discourse, not only on our nuclear future, but also on the future of our energy system more broadly.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we will try to cover all that in the discussion. Thank you very much. So Alexander, you are the managing director of Arti, and well, you do not only hold a PhD in philosophy, but you also look back on more than a decade of research in various areas of applied ethics. So with this background and with this expertise, why this panel, and why now? Why is it so important to have it right now?
Well, I mean, ethics is the analysis of moral values and of moral arguments, and it can help us a lot to recognize our own implicit biases. And we all have implicit biases, of course. And this is, I think this is particularly valuable in the current social climate, where we have so much toxic disagreement. I mean, the COVID-19 debate is the best example for that and how we deal with it. And I mean, tonight's topic is a different topic, but again, we have a mainstream. It's anti-nuclear in Germany, but in the same way, I mean, that could be biased. It's not impossible that it's biased, at least in some aspects. And so in a way, we have to figure out, is it biased, is it not? And I think having debate about it is just a good way to do that. And I think we just invited the right experts tonight, and I look very much forward to listen to the discussion.
Yeah, we all do. Thank you. And well, let's go back to the institution of RT, which, gives us the infrastructure for tonight's discussion. RT is part of the KIT's excellence strategy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, what that is?
Yeah, I mean, by centrally integrating an academy specialized in ethics, the KIT shows, so to say, the relevance of normative questions for teaching, innovation, and research. It seems to be very clear that new technologies like, for example, CRISPR or big data, and of course also new energy forms new forms of energy production, they have a profound impact on our social systems, and it's a consequence of that ethical implications should be considered from the very beginning, I think. Hence, excellence doesn't just mean, so to say, to be amongst the best in research, for example, but to have a responsible attitude as well towards technology. And I think that's one of the main reasons why you can really call RT part of the excellence strategy of the KIT. And of course, the perspective of the citizens is also important in that context. And that's one of the main reasons why we start formats like that to have a broader discussion about it, so to say. So.
I see. Yeah, we're looking forward to more formats like this in the future. Thanks a lot, Rafaela. Thanks, Alexander. And I will say goodbye to you now, just to say hello to our panel participants who are already waiting for us. And we will say hello to them without any further ado. Hello. Yes, so welcome to our group, our panel group. I will start right away, just checking. Yeah, there are many people. Yes, so I will start with you, Armin. Hello, Professor Dr. Armin Grunwald. Hello, pleased to meet you. You are head of the Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis of KIT, head of the Office of Technology Assessment at the German Bundestag, called TAB, and a professor of philosophy of technology at the Institute of Philosophy at KIT, and also member of the National Monitoring Committee for the Repository Search. So, so you already mentioned to me beforehand that, two of your focus areas are the theory of technology assessment and the ethical point of view. And this is also the way you looked at our discussion, a topic for tonight. So when we talked about it before, you said that the word "or" in our headline is the tricky one. Utopia or nightmare. Can you tell us a little bit more about this problem with the word "or"?
Yes, thank you. A very small word. It creates the impression that there are many people regarding nuclear as a utopia and others regarding nuclear as a nightmare. I guess there are still many people considering nuclear as a nightmare, but probably almost nobody is in Germany, in Europe, or wherever, who considers really nuclear as a utopia. This was different in the 1950s and 60s. It's incredible today reading newspapers of that time. There was an appraisal of nuclear cars, nuclear heatings, nuclear airplanes, and whatever. And even German philosopher Ernst Bloch, he expressed in an interview for some newspaper, well, what a wonderful thing. We will be able to transform the Sahara Desert into a blooming and flourishing landscape with only some 100 kilograms of uranium. So this is really a utopian thinking. But what we do today, and I guess this will always also be the issue of the evening today, we will be more considering the subtitle of the evening. It's about comparing benefits and risks. And this is much more down to earth than to think in terms of utopia or nightmare.
I see. Thank you very much for that, and thanks for this insight into your thoughts about the word "or" and utopia and nightmare. These strong words. So I will go on with Professor Dr. Benham Tavy. Hello, welcome, Benham. Hello, please.
Good evening. Hello.
So you are Associate Professor in Ethics of Technology and Scientific Director of the Safety and Security Institute at Delft University of Technology. You're highly interested in technologically driven ethics, also in nuclear energy, and in understanding global challenges in general, such as nuclear energy production and waste management, as you mentioned before. And there's a book you are the co-editor of, which is called The Ethics of Nuclear Energy, which is, just a perfect match for our discussion for tonight. So, Benham, please tell us what came to your mind when you first read the panel discussion topic. What came to your mind?
Thanks very much, Katharina. And let me also first thank Artie and Rafael and Alex for hosting us tonight, for facilitating the meeting. So what first thing that came to my mind was indeed very fascinating, very good that the issue is being put on the public agenda, public debate agenda. And I think I'm with Armin in actually sort of also disagreeing with the title in terms of this is for me too much of a binary distinction. This is too much of a dichotomy in terms of it's not either utopia or a nightmare, as probably somewhere between there. And again, that fits very well in the line that Artie wants to follow. That's the shades of gray that Rafaela was referring to. I'm also trained as an engineer, I'm a material scientist by training, also a philosopher, moved to philosophy at some later point. So great piece of engineering makes my heart beat faster. And at the same time, as a philosopher, I do also see some implications of important technology. So as far as I'm concerned, we need to try to sort of incorporate some profound ethical thinking into the understanding and application of nuclear technology, by which it does not necessarily end up in a yes or a no, but actually end up in, if you say yes, what do you say yes to exactly? Are we talking about what kind of nuclear energy, what kind of nuclear fuel cycle, what is the energy, the reactor technology that you are in favor of or defending? And if you say no, are you saying categorically no to any kind of nuclear fission now and in the future with every other possibility that is coming up? That would also be a pretty, as far as I'm concerned, indefensible stance to take. So I'm very much interested in bringing in ethics into the debate. And I'm also very much interested in front-loading ethics. So ethics is not only an afterthought. As far as I'm concerned, it's something that should be there on the design table, should be there from the process of introducing and building and thinking about, also for the policy, arguing for a specific type of nuclear energy. So that proactive thinking about ethics is sort of my drive in general in my academic work, but also definitely in this debate tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that for now. So I will go on with Dr. Thomas Walter-Tromm. Thomas, hello. Great to have you here. You are head. Good evening. You are head of the program Nuclear Waste Management, Safety and Radiation Research and spokesperson topic 6 Nuclear Safety Research of the KIT Energy Center. And from your point of view and expertise, you were telling me beforehand that for you, similar to Armin, the word "or" is an issue in our headline because nuclear energy is neither utopia nor nightmare. We heard that before. And I think, you might explain a bit more about this point of view.
Yeah, for me, I'm a mechanical engineer from my education. And for me, it's more rational balancing between nuclear and other energy sources we have available. And being very often in Brussels with the European Commission, I have as well a look at other countries, and they look differently on the issue of nuclear. So if you go to Great Britain, people wouldn't understand that what is behind an ethical issue of nuclear. It's just for them, it sounds very emotional, and they have a more rational look on it and say, well, is it good or bad? We have to talk about fission. We have to talk about fission products. We have to talk about final storage systems, whatever they look like. but they have a much more rational view on this. And this would be, as an engineer as well, my approach. So if you, even a professor, my student career is a long time ago, I can tell you, but one of my first professors in engineering education, he said, oh, well, we are as well happy for every nuclear power plant we wouldn't have to build. So if we have any other sources, it's fine. And this is the same, certainly for me, if we have something else available, which is in this triangle economy and ecology and availability, it's perfectly fine, and we wouldn't need nuclear. But we see today with these climate problems and so on, that it could be that we would need it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll just tell the audience again that we have a certain hashtag to communicate with us. And this is RT, as I already mentioned, ARRTI. And then we have a little line underneath, and then KKW. This is the hashtag for tonight. And of course, you can also participate with emails and post your questions via email. KKW period panel period 2020 at gmail.com. So yeah, these are two ways to communicate with us. And of course, you can use the YouTube comment function to communicate with us. We will go on in our little introduction round with Dr. Anna Veronika Wendland. Hello, Anna. Great to have you here. Hi. So, hello, good evening. So you are from Herder Institute for Historical Research on East Central Europe. And yeah, would like to mention that you are project leader of C1 Enlarged Security Nuclear Governance at the Collaborative Research Center, SFB TRR 138, Dynamics of Security, Marburg and Gießen. And would also like to mention the project peer reviews and the making of transnational nuclear safety. And of course, your habilitation project, Atomgrad, Nuclear Modernity in Eastern Europe, from 1966 to 2020, which was accomplished this year. So beforehand, you introduced yourself to me as a, well, let's say border crosser of disciplines with your academic background as a historian and with your expertise in industrial anthropology, which is a rather broad perspective, and also brings you to the conclusion that Germany is in a minority vote position, as you said, regarding nuclear energy. Could you tell us a bit more about this point of view?
Yes, to begin with, perhaps referring to our subtitle, Utopia or Nightmare. Perhaps for you, it's interesting to know that I did research, one of my case studies, one of the places I did field research is in Ukraine, and the same landscape as Chernobyl is indeed the sister power plant of Chernobyl in the same wood and swamp area, Polisia. And so I began my research in a land where nuclear was utopia and nightmare both. Since the Soviet Union implemented nuclear, first of all, as a technological utopia, and it created a very interesting social forms we never created in Germany. For example, the Atomgrad, so the specialist nuclear city, which is specially built to serve the needs of large reactor parks, predominantly in very remote wood and swamp areas. And that's a very interesting thing. So these Atomgrade, they landed as nuclear spaceships in very remote and not very densely populated areas. And they really brought modernity and social mobilization and utopia, social utopia to these lands. So in a way, they had this utopian thing, and they they constructed a whole culture of, a whole visual culture of nuclear utopias around these nuclear power plants, Chernobyl being one of them. And then they had that accident in 1986, and they experienced the nightmare side of nuclear. So my research really began in that land, in the land of Chernobyl, which experienced both paths of nuclear. And then I switched, for comparative reasons, I switched to Germany. So I did research at the place, at nuclear power plants, because I was extremely interested in what is the everyday experience of nuclear work and of nuclear man-machine relations. So in a way, what is the, how is all this, very theoretical and ethical considerations on nuclear safety, how are they implemented on the ground there? And so this was my the main topic of my research when I went into these places. And so I learned very much about how ethics are translated into everyday nuclear work in a way. So for me, it was very interesting to learn about how these people, how these engineers at the field, or these technicians, or these field operators are, for example, dealing with risk, or with fear, with hierarchy, with their own self-concepts of being, an engineer mastering this technology. These concepts on what role am I playing for my society, and so this was the question I was interested in. So, in a way, this very basic fieldwork approach to nuclear, which is perhaps different to the usual thing we are doing, and for example, in doing technology history. Perhaps that's enough for the beginning.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for this interesting insight. Yeah, thank you. So last but not least, Professor Dr. Eberhard Umbach. Hello, Eberhard. Hello. Great to have you here. I would just mention a few milestones in your work. So you were president of the German Physical Society, CEO of the Karlsruhe Research Center, president of the KIT member and board member of Acatech, National Academy of Science and Engineering, and they're responsible for the topic energy, and board member of Energy Systems of the Future, and project leader and co-project leader of several energy studies on nuclear energy and renewable energy and energy transition. And with this background, your opinion on our topic and its relevance to our current situation was quite clear. You said you regard nuclear energy not as a current topic for 3 reasons. Could you tell us these 3 reasons, please? Hello? We can't hear you. You are muted. You can.
Now
I'm perfect. Thanks.
So first of all, I would like to start with contradicting Armin Grunwald, namely in the sense that there are an increasing number of, in particular, physicists, by the way, who think that nuclear energy should be considered for the energy transition in Germany, and that would be much more important than doing all the other things. So this number is not small, but I think compared to the general population, it's a small number still. So my opinion on it is rather simple. I would say neither nor. Neither utopia nor a nightmare. If we would decide in Germany in a democratic way to go for nuclear power within the next, say, 10 to 20 years, I would have no objections against it, because I think we can handle the problem, all of the problems that are connected with nuclear power. So for me, it's no problem to go this way. However, I don't think it makes sense at the moment for the 3 reasons you mentioned. One of them is there are lots of people who have voted against it, indirectly more than directly. And I think it's still a majority in Germany that does not want to have nuclear power back again. And I think we should live with democratic decisions, and it's more important than anything else, as we have learned also recently from the US, that democracy is not an easy task, but it is an extremely important task. The second point is, if we would have a lengthy discussion on nuclear power again, we had these discussions in the past, if we would have it again, it would really distract us from our goals for the energy transition. And we would like to be successful with the energy transition. And if we have lots of battlefields around energy transitions, we would be detracted from the final goal. So I would keep my hands off this discussion, at least for the next couple of years. And the third reason is because of the enormous safety requirements, the lengthy approval procedures, and the disposal problem, the nuclear power would be so expensive that no company would jump into the field and do it. And if you ask people from these energy companies, they all tell you, no, we keep our hands off. This is nothing for the next 10 to 20 years, at least not in Germany. Of course, there are lots of other countries who go for nuclear power. It's actually an increasing number of nuclear power stations compared to those who are switched off. But I think in Central Europe, or in Europe in general, it's not so many, apart from our neighbor Poland, maybe, that would go for nuclear power. In 20 or 30 years from now, that might be different. Then we might think about fusion, and maybe then we have new arguments, and then we have a new generation. Not the generation that fought against nuclear power for several years, for actually several decades. And then everything might look different. But at the moment, I would really hope that we keep our fingers off.
Thank you, Eberhard, and thank you for starting the discussion right away, the debate. And I can see that Anna raised her hand and would like to answer and to comment. So please, Anna.
Of course, I heard that that argument of Eberhard very often in these discussions. So if we head again towards nuclear, that will be pulling all of the money from renewables and so on. But I suppose that this is due to a specific structure of the German discussion, which is this, really this or discussion. Either these 100% renewables strategy, which is highly under pressure now, because we see that we decided in 2011, but never provided for a discussion on electricity storage, for example. But I think the main point is that the German discussion is concentrated on these ends in itself solutions. So very often, renewables proponents or the lobbyists see renewables as the end in itself and not as an instrument to achieve a goal. And the goal is to decarbonize an industrial society. And my argument always would be, if we would be more concentrating on the goal, and we have many studies which would support an energy mix, which is made up of renewables and nuclear, which it's technically discussable, it's possible. And so I think if we would switch the whole discourse in Germany from the instruments or the ends in itself to the real goal, and the goal is decarbonization, we could have another structure, and we could have another character of this discussion. But of course, as a historian, I say, we have so much of these historical, in principle, these bad experiences of a very, very controversial discussion. So many politicians are now regarding this topic as toxic because they remember this typical German controversy, which was, at least in Western Germany, the biggest controversy in post-war Germany. And they are so grateful to Chancellor Merkel that she settled this controversy that they do not want to have it again. So it is, in a way, a combined problem of, thinking about societal consensus and on not very structurally thinking on energy transition as I consider it. Thank you.
Armin, I can see your hand raised. So would you like to contribute?
Yeah, few remarks. As a philosopher, Anna, I really like this approach of thinking in means to an end. And indeed, we humans always are in risk to take means as ends in themselves. And this is in particular the case with technologies. It was the case with nuclear in the 1960s. In German language, the era was called Atomzeitalter. And this was a synonym at that time with a paradise-like situation. So this was quasi an end in itself. And in the time of the Energiewende, shortly after Fukushima, at that time, the renewables received the status of an end in themselves by many people, Ralf Fuchs, for example. And this was a failure, and we had to learn about this. So we have really to think about means to an end. And this is, I guess, was what Walter was calling rational. Yeah, being rational. Means to an end, considering means and assessing them with respect to their effectivity, their efficiency, their non-intended side effects, their risks, their benefits, and so on. That is indeed our business also in technology assessment, what we are doing all the time. And one last word to Eberhard. I guess there's no contradiction, because what I meant by saying that today there will be almost nobody regarding nuclear as utopia. And you talked about physicists who want to see a future for nuclear in the German energy supply system. To see a future for nuclear means regarding nuclear as a means to some end, to maintaining energy security, to combating climate change, and so on. This is means to an end thinking, while utopian thinking in the 1960s was not in this time of rationality. It was just a different way of thinking, and perhaps this overly exaggerated way of regarding nuclear power as a kind of salvation in the 1960s was among the reasons of its fall. There's a direct way from a utopia to a nightmare.
Yes.
I would like to bring in another argument, and I'm not sure, it's probably more a question to all of us than a real argument. When I discuss this nuclear issue, for example, in Poland with colleagues, I have this negative argument that we have today, especially in Europe, very pluralistic societies, let's call them. So we have different opinions in different majorities, and they change every 4 or 5 years when we have an election. And nuclear, for me, is something you have to consider long term. So if you build a nuclear power plant, you need a couple of years to build it up. Then you have an operation time, if it is economically successful, of 60 years. Americans say about 80 years. And then you have as well to consider kind of a storage, interim storage and final waste disposal. So for a newcomer state, I think this is something you really have to have in mind. And even we do not have a United States of Europe at the moment, but perhaps in 100 years from now, then it might be a different story, because then you can group things and so on. But at the moment, I think this is really a critical argument, considering nuclear and renewables. This is certainly much easier. You can switch a wind turbine off and then it's gone, and you decommission it or dismantle it, and the story is over. So I would like to hear the impression of the audience about it.
Anna, I can see. Oh, yeah, and Eberhard. So you first, let's start with Anna and then go to, I think Anna was first.
Yes, I recently had an interview with a Polish representative of a Polish foundation, of a Polish think tank. And it was actually what I was saying. We have to respect Poland's plans. They are decided to use nuclear as an instrument for decarbonization. But in this interview, I said, this is a decision society has really to discuss before it enters into this technology, because it's 100 years decision. It's over 3 generations. You will be, in a way, you will be then tied to this choice. So it really requires a broad societal discussion. And it is indeed that what I missed after Fukushima in Germany, because Fukushima was really, it was decided after Fukushima, the nuclear phase out was decided within a week without general consultation. Of course, we had this pressure in the streets. We have these people taking in the streets about very highly mobilized part of our population. It was at least 300,000 people in the streets these days, I remember. But we had never a discussion including all these, climate things and so on. So, and I think this is precisely the reason why we are now running into difficulties with our energy transition, because we didn't have this this discussion. We had, interestingly enough, we had an ethics commission to provide this, a substitute for this societal discussion. But if I read these basic sources, the Basistext der Energiewende, as I call it, as a historian, we see very much of, in a way, this messianism and utopianism of, Germany leading the world to new solutions, and of course making big money with it as well. And it is very interesting for me that that the Germans took, or the German government regarded it as needed to have this question decided in a so-called ethics commission, and not, for example, in a parliamentary enquete commission, how it was in the 80s. This is a very interesting thing, why it was an ethics commission, and was it really open? Had it really an open question to decide, or was it already settled and they had only to give this, salvational glorium around the decision, and in order to have it regarded as ethical? And this, I think, for the historical point of view, this is a very crucial question we still have to answer, how this decision was actually made and how it was legitimized that days.
Thank you. Benham, I can see your hand. You would like to, to tell us something. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar enough with how the political system exactly works in Germany, so I'm unable to continue the discussion Anna started. But if you allow me to go back to the question Walter put on the table, I would like to talk about actually how to deal with the diversity in the population in a pluralistic society, because I think it's a very valid point. A nuclear power plant you don't build overnight, and you don't decide to build it overnight, and that's a good thing, because you're actually sort of committing your society to 10, 20 years of building, and after that 30, 50, maybe even in the modern plants, longer period of actually energy production, and after that the decommissioning. So that's very much understandable that those decisions actually take a long time. But at the same time, we need to realize that we are dealing with a very diverse population, and also our understanding of what is acceptable and correct might change over time. I just want to remind that the same Chancellor Merkel's administration that decided to phase out nuclear power plant had decided 6 months earlier to extend the lifetime of the 17 power plants. So just Fukushima happened, and some public debate emerged in Germany, and the same administration then decided to actually go back to the original period, shut down half of the 17 power plants that were operational at that moment immediately, and shut down the other half in 2022. So this is something that, again, that adds to the complexity of decision-making in terms of how to deal with what I like to call also the ethical diversity and the ethical uncertainties involved in these decision-makings. I'm not having a solution immediately. I want to say that this is not unique to nuclear energy per se. In a lot of decision-making, we are doing a lot of things. We are also at Energiewende. If renewables turn out to not be actually the right answer, and Germany would switch massively to coal again, that is also a decision that you're committing future generations to. So in a lot of actually climate, energy, and a large number, actually large grand challenges of the current century, we are committing our societies to decisions for the next 10 to maybe even a century ahead of us. And so it does require a debate, but this is not a debate particularly, this is not necessarily only a debate with respect to nuclear energy.
Now Eberhard, to make my comments. They're getting more and more, the more people talk. First of all, the question just raised, or the argument just raised, is very, very interesting to look at what happened in the month after Fukushima. It happened that in Europe, 54,000 articles were published about nuclear power and the disaster of Fukushima. 54,000. Most of them, of course, were against and were criticizing and were full of fear and anger. 45,000 of these were published in Germany. This is the reason why the politicians immediately reacted and stepped out half a year after they had done the opposite. By the way, interesting enough, the second most publications were in Switzerland. And Switzerland actually is the country in Europe that is the one that is is following Germany step out, but in the Swiss way, in a much more moderate and way, let's say, rational way compared to Germany. So this is clear that the public opinion, the published opinion, plays an important role in our discussion. So first of all, if we would like to convince our society to go with nuclear in the future, we have to convince all the media to support it. And for that, you need really more than good arguments. So my point, and I would like to address Anna with my next statement, it was not that I don't think it is useful or makes sense to go to nuclear. And in fact, if we would continue the still existing power stations, nuclear power stations for another 10, 20, 30 years, that would help the energy transition a lot. It would reduce the CO2 emissions quite a bit. But what I don't want to have, and I think it's very important to think about the socio-economic aspects. The socio-economic aspect means that if we start a discussion on nuclear versus non-nuclear future now, then we would distract the attention from the challenges that are lying ahead, not only the corona challenges, but in particular the climate challenges. And we should concentrate on getting things done. And of course, the renewables are not the ideal solution because they are fluctuating. They are intermittent, and they need a lot of accompanying things like storage and spare power stations and so forth. So renewables are not that easy to go with. And it would help if we would have still our nuclear power stations run for another, say, 20, 30 years. However, a discussion about that would hurt total approach of the energy transitions, and therefore we should keep our fingers off. That was my point. Not that I think that is not useful. I'm convinced that it would be much better to have the existing power stations to continue for the energy transition, but I don't think it's good for our social climate in Germany. And by the way, not only Germany, there are other countries around that are on a similar scale. For example, Austria, for example, Switzerland, even France, that has a large fraction of nuclear power for the electricity. They are now changing their mind, at least to some extent. And there are other countries around, apart from Poland. But in Poland, the utopia is maybe ahead of the reality because the timescales they have are probably unrealistic. And maybe then the political climate will change also. And then we have another discussion in Europe. Europe is difficult, but I think we have to fight for it.
Thank you. I can see Anna and Armin would like to add or comment on that, and afterwards would like to put in some questions which are already piling up. So first of all, Anna, please.
Yes, this only addressing this argument again, this point, hands off, because the discussion would really mess us up with our Energiewende. Yes, of course. To have this discussion, it's not the easy way, and that's precisely the reason why politicians are in personal encounter are telling me, yes, you are right. It would be better to have these 6 German power plants in the grid after 22, because we face real problems. But nobody wants to say this officially, because they are simply fearing that it's too toxic to have them in their position, to remain in their position. So this is really a problem. But on the other hand, let's address the point: is it true? Is it really true when we would begin to discuss, for example, simply this 6 German power plants, no new build program, simply this pragmatic approach? So what would happen if we regard what we wrote in our memorandum? We called for a very strict acceleration program of storage technology, for example. So we did not play that zero-sum game that we want have everything concentrated on nuclear and the other thing doesn't interest us. But we argued specifically in this direction, that we think that we should now have a complementary approach, fostering the renewables, really preparing the ground for this large-scale industrial storage infrastructure, and at the same time, in a way, providing a backup for renewables by simply prolonging the lifetime of these 6 power plants, and instead getting rid of this lignite. This was the point that we said it is really idiotism to rely on these lignite plants to the late 2030s. So this was the point. And I still think, as of course, I'm an eco-modernist, so I think I'm an optimist, and I think that we can approach people with a consistent and complementary and not very ideological approach to climate policy, and then we could get them, and perhaps we could get the climate movement to consider that. And I think we have simply now a changed framework. We are 10 years after Fukushima, and now the climate question is at the main problem. And many people are now reconsidering their position towards nuclear. So I think, why not trying it? Simply stopping a discussion whereas it comes up, because it's time has come. It appears to me that the time has come. Is perhaps not the right solution to solve our energy transition problems.
Yeah, so my first direct response to Anna, what is a right decision? In a democracy, in my mind, it's the decision of the Bundestag, independent from it suits me or not. And so it is as it is. Second, I would like to come back to Walter's remark. It was really good because we were talking about nuclear as a technology, but you made the point of democracy having a timescale of 4 to 5 years, nuclear of many decades. And this is an issue. And in the 1970s, I guess it was Robert Jung, with the book Der Atomstaat, he raised the point that in his mind, nuclear power is completely incompatible with democracy for several reasons. And this book was very influential. So it was not only, the anti-nuclear movement was not only driven by concerns of risk and waste disposal and so on, it was also driven by a political concern in the time after the students' revolution. It was also driven by mistrust against big companies. It was driven by concerns of military misuse. So it was not only about risk issues of technology, but considering all the context of nuclear power in Germany of that time. And perhaps one last remark to my observation. Up to now, we talked not about ethics of nuclear. We have been talking about political issues, more or less, and history. And this was very insightful, but it was ethical only to a little extent. So I would like to raise an ethical question now. If we only, in the kind of a thought experiment, let's assume that the world goes for nuclear to combat climate change as fast as possible. Regarding the fact that now the share of nuclear power to the world energy demand is only a few percent, I don't know exactly the number, I guess we need thousands of new reactors, thousands. What does this mean in terms of risk, for example? What does this mean in terms of the resources we need? The raw materials, the mining, the transportation, the control in many countries which are not so well equipped like perhaps Germany and others. I guess these are questions which come after the idea that nuclear might be good to combat climate change. If we would go for this, this would have a lot of implications we also should discuss with respect to ethical criteria.
So, Benham, you would like to comment?
Yeah, that's a very good
right?
point that Armin is raising. I think it's also important to realize that in this context, there is some development going on, and the nuclear landscape is shifting. Indeed, tonight's debate is about Germany, but it's also important to realize what's happening around Germany, but also worldwide. Poland has been mentioned a number of times, but also not unimportant to mention that the administration of Johnson in the UK has also decided to commission 2 more reactors in addition to the 2 they are building right now in Hinkley Point. So some development in Europe already going on. But perhaps even more importantly is that the nuclear landscape completely shifting towards other parts of the world. If you look at the projections of where the new power plants are going to raise, that would be China, that would be India, that would be Russia. Those are actually the 3 main countries building the new reactors. And again, each one of them are very important because they will also be the countries that are building the new reactors for other countries that are entering the nuclear field. So Russia, for instance, has this very fascinating model, fascinating from an economic point of view, at least, that they call the build, own, operate, the BOO or the BOO approach, which means that they build reactors for countries that are in need of electricity. A lot of developing countries are in huge need of big amounts of electricity. So they build those reactors and commission them, run them for several years and leave the reactor behind. So I think it's just important to realize that some major countries are going to take over the role that the United States had and that France had and Japan had as the 3 main nuclear countries in the world. That's shifting to other parts of the world, and that brings it, as Armin very correctly says, safety implications, but also security implications from the non-proliferation point of view. How is the nuclear technology going to spread throughout the world, and what kind of proliferation impact would that have? And again, not unimportant to realize that the need and the demand on the emerging economies, but also many developing countries, is going to only increase. The interest is there and will only increase in the next couple of years. Think of the fact that, for instance, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries that has expressed the intention to have 60 nuclear power plants. That is comparable to actually the size of German nuclear energy production. Think of Iran, that is also another country that has serious nuclear ambitions. So this shifting, the global shift, will bring many, many implications with it.
I will jump in right there because we have a question about China in this context. So maybe I can read out this question. Posed by Ole. Ole would like to know, can you comment on how nuclear power investment makes sense for China? So who would like to answer? Yeah.
I can say a few words to this. I think that, and this is a good argument as well from Armin came up. I think China is investing a lot in renewable energies, certainly, but is investing as well in nuclear energy. And I think the costs are, when it's correct, what Chinese colleagues tell me, the costs are pretty balanced. So it is not much cheaper to build up a nuclear power plant than a wind farm or something else. Nuclear has certainly the advantage that it has a base load, and this is certainly for the energy demand of China something. But what Armin said is absolutely true, and I think it is already happening. China and Russia are using nuclear power plants, building up nuclear power plants, as well as a geopolitical issue. So they have influence in some, let's call it developing countries. In Egypt, when they build their nuclear power plant of this size of about 1,000, 1,200 megawatt electric, they build, operate it, so then they have a certain influence, and they are doing this as well in other African states. They're trying to build it up, and China does the same. So the situation Armin just raised up is already happening, and I don't know whether Europe has good arguments against it, but in my opinion, we cannot, as Europeans, we could only have the argument balance nuclear and as much renewables as possible to have all the energy demands you need. But certainly the situation is at the moment for nuclear growing, but I think as well in a kind of a negative way because of these political influences of these, not really democracies.
When we're talking about these perspectives and the European perspective, there is another interesting question coming in right now. And maybe, Armin, you would like to answer that question. It is the nuclear power plant debate not simply an example of German angst? Are we simply too risk adverse here? So yeah, maybe.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I like talking about this. German angst is a nice construction. I guess each rich country has its own angst. For example, the Americans, millions of Americans are afraid of millions of Mexicans waiting at the other side of the border to invade their country. So there is phobia, I guess, in all well-developed countries because they have to lose a lot. Whether German angst really exists, I don't know. But I was really surprised to read, it's 10 years ago, so it was shortly before Fukushima, a Eurobarometer survey. You can find it on the internet. That is a representative survey in all of the member states of the European Union. And it was about acceptance and assessment of nuclear power. And my really big surprise was Germany. In these 27 member states, Germany was mostly in the mid of all the answers. Mostly in the mid, not at the upper boundary or at the lower boundary. It was in the mid. And this was the second surprise, very close to France. Mostly in Germany, people say, well, the French, they are very nuclear friendly, but the survey demonstrates they are not. So it seems that nuclear in France is more a project of the elites. And perhaps, I'm not a political scientist, but I guess it would be worthwhile to explore whether nuclear power flourishes best in top-down oriented states. It's a hypothesis, I don't know. And so it's not only a German story with this debate. Perhaps some of the expressions like Ebert was telling us in Switzerland and Germany after the Fukushima disaster, they are specific in a sense. But we have also discussions in many other states. And even in Japan, I don't know about surveys, but after the Fukushima disaster, there was a movement away from nuclear. And it was stopped and reversed only by the top-down intervention of the government. So this would support my thesis that nuclear flourishes best in perhaps more top-down oriented states.
Anna, you would like to answer?
I would say, I as a historian would say not necessarily, because we have good examples which would be arguing against it. For example, Finland or Sweden, which or Canada, who have not only a not top-down oriented nuclear policy, but by the way, in Canada, they have very interesting internal organization of the nuclear industry with a very high emphasis on labor participation and workers' autonomy in, for example, in radiation protection. They have very interesting approaches. So it is a highly democratized nuclear culture in Canada, for example, in Sweden as well. In Germany, we have a sort of a mixed system because our nuclear industry is very starkly influenced by the traditions of our public utilities, you know, and this is another internal culture at these plants, as for example in Russia, where we have or in the US, where we have this command and obedience structure or a high emphasis on hierarchy. And so I think it is more complicated. I think it is more about in a way of acceptance in a society that there are experts and there are some needs to be met, and it's right in France. It's rather a pragmatic decision, and do not forget, France is a nuclear state, a nuclear weapons state, and of course, nuclear anyway, it's connected to self-concepts of French grandeur and sovereignness, and this, of course, decides much about even the average Frenchman's decisions on nuclear. Nuclear is not, you know, it's not the burner, as we say, but they accept it. Eventually, they accept it, and I think this is the same thing with this allegedly German angst. I think the German angst is a construct. It is not, you cannot empirically really empirically prove that the Germans are more fearful than other nations are. And as you, Armin, rightly said, other societies harbor other sorts of angsts. But I think what we really can observe in Germany, it's a strong tradition of technology criticism and a strong tradition of modernity criticism in our elites, in our bourgeois elites. And so these, you know, the Greens are now so successful in our middle class because they really rely on that tradition, which is not only leftist and anti-governmental and, you know, system crushing and anti-capitalist, but first of all, the Greens emerge from the German bourgeoisie and from the middle class, and they really connect their, you know, nature protection impetus and modernity criticism and big tech criticism. It is highly rooted in everyday concepts of many Germans of the middle class, though we are an engineering nation. This is this interesting, I would say, this complex and controversial thing why this German engineers nation is so anti-nuclear. But I think we can root that in a very deeply rooted technology skepticism in Germany. And what we see now on these COVID demonstrations, I think it is another outcome of this criticism, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. We've got so many questions coming in here and so little time, so we'll try to cover as many as possible. So I've got a question here for Benham. We'll read it out. This is radioactive waste radiates much longer than we can seriously plan. This implies above all that people will be affected by the consequences of the final disposal of nuclear waste when we and the next generations are already dead. Does this not already rule out the possibility of talking about something like responsible final disposal at all? This is a rather complex question. Would you like to tell us something?
I will try to actually respond to it quickly if I manage to. The question is indeed rather complex, but I think it's a very valid question because a lot of nuclear waste that we have at this moment available is a type of waste that will remain radiotoxic for a very long period of time. Some are varying between 10,000 years up to 100,000 years and even longer, depending on how we define waste lifetime. That's also a technical definition. It's also something that we agree on in engineering terms. Which calls into question, could we dispose of such a thing? Could engineering facilitate us with disposing it of in a responsible fashion? The idea is that we contain it, we put it deep on the ground, as the Swedes are doing, as the Finns are doing. We do it deep on the ground, we put it deep on the ground in containers and contain it as much as possible by engineered barriers, building concrete walls around it, but also by natural barriers to make sure that if anything starts leaking, which will happen probably because of corrosion, that the radiation will not reach the biosphere very fast. So there is a lot of engineering actually put into its place to make sure that we could deal with this in an as much as possible safe fashion in the future. But of course, the question is, what level of protection do we want to guarantee for the future, and how could we do that in the current engineering practices that we have? That's one thing with the existing waste. The other one is actually, if we are to continue nuclear energy production, how could we justify imposing such a risk on the people in the future? This brings me to my introduction into this session, that when I said that ethics need to be actually sort of front-loaded in our thinking, because there are waste lifetime, there are actually waste energy production methods, fuel cycles, that would enable us to reduce the waste lifetime substantially. I think a lot of that think about the current existing production methods that use the conventional reactors. I'm trying to avoid using too technical terms, but that use the conventional reactors. We could recycle the existing spent fuel, used fuel, and we could even further deactivate that. A lot of that research is actually going on at Karlsruhe right now, the so-called partitioning and transmutation, to reduce the waste lifetime substantially, to make sure that we reduce the waste lifetime to, for instance, a couple of 100 years to 1,000 years, which is a very long period of time, but compared to the 100,000 years that we started with, it's substantially lower. That's one. And another is that new reactor technology could enable us to produce different type of waste. So that's also, again, another type of thinking. If we want to continue nuclear energy, is there a specific type that is more justifiable than the other? Because I would very much like to bring that kind of distinction between, rather than saying completely yes and completely no to nuclear energy, say that, okay, if we say that nuclear energy is going to have a place in the future of energy mix in Germany, in Europe, worldwide, is a specific type of nuclear reactor, nuclear fuel cycle, production method that we would favor, we should favor. And as far as I'm concerned, we should move towards actually production methods that on the one hand could ensure safety as much as possible, safety and security and non-proliferation. On the other hand, actually sort of ensure that we reduce the waste lifetime and impose as little as possible safety risks, safety issues on people in the future.
Yeah, thank you. I can see that Anna and Armin would like to answer. Oh, no, Anna, only, right? Yes.
Yeah, only a short question to Behnam. When I participated in similar discussions, I heard that anyway, even if you have these fast reactors, anyway, you have a rest of minor actinides, which you have to give in a deep disposal. So you really you can really reduce the amount of it, but anyway you cannot solve the problem. Is it right? I'm simply no good specialist in this thing, so I would simply hear your
I think the argument is correct, Anna. It's also major actinides that we cannot completely deactivate and remove, because the remainders of the major actinides will need final disposal for a long time anyway. And also the minor actinides, part of them need also long-term protection and long-term disposal. What would help with this new method to deactivate and reduce the waste lifetime and would very much be that the volume of major actinides, uranium and plutonium, could be substantially reduced. So the volume of the waste that one needs to deal with will be substantially reduced. But a lot of these arguments have been made more like at the lab level. We could do that. There has not been actually scaling up, showing that this could be done on an industrial level. Could we actually deal with waste and what will be remaining? So what are the actual practical implications? Those are things that need to be further investigated.
Might be I can add a little bit from the scientific expertise we have here at KIT. So all these European projects, we consider this partitioning, and we considered as well transmutation. A Mura reactor in Belgium, for example, built up for this transmutation issue. And certainly it's true that at the moment we have to consider as well certain losses, as well in the partitioning part, in the reprocessing part, in the specialized reprocessing part, as well as in the transmission. But if you would continue these cycles, always partitioning again these minor actinides and then transmute them, then you would have in principle only the losses within the cycle. But nevertheless, at the moment we assume that there are some certain losses, even if it is only a few percent, which you have to store off and put in a final disposal. And the second issue that you have as well to look at the long-lived fission products, which we do not tackle at the moment, but we have certain ideas with it, and you have to consider this as well. So to be scientifically correct. Yeah.
Walter, I have a question for you coming in here, and it is, what is the common understanding of the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear disaster among specialists? Why do they no longer seriously talk about the aftermath of the disaster? Would you like to answer?
Honestly speaking, in these groups at the IAEA and the International Atomic Energy Agency or in the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency, we do talk about Fukushima, the accident, how it could happen, what went wrong, and all these safety measures they didn't take into account in beforehand, and so on, and what are the managerial outcomes of this, what has to be changed in the regulations and so on. This is the major issues we learned. How can a country very individualized Japan?
Got some problems to hear you. Maybe your connection is getting lost.
Can you still hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. So I don't know where I should start from.
Now it's getting better.
No, yeah, now it's better. No, it is really a regulatory question. How could Japan doesn't handle this safety implementation, safety measures we all have implemented in Europe, in the United States, and so on? How could consider these safety measures as different pumps for cooling measures and so on? And it's really something we were all astonished about. We have to even industrialized countries problems. And the second issue, no?
It's getting lost again.
Okay.
Problematic. Maybe it's getting better in a couple of minutes. We will see.
I did another person.
Yeah,
because I think.
Yeah, so maybe it will get better in a couple of minutes. So we will just switch to a next question and try it on later. Yeah. So I've got a question here for, maybe for Eberhard. Yes, some people say that the German phase out from nuclear energy and also nuclear know-how leave the nuclear waste problem behind unsolved and prevents a solution which could lie in new reactor types. What do you think about that? What could you say about that, Eberhard?
Well, I think continuing running the existing power stations is a solution that is in principle doable, although if you ask the energy provider, electricity provider, they will say they would like to step out. They don't want to be involved anymore. It's too complicated in Germany. Building new ones, yes, I think they're wonderful new concepts to follow, but they are very expensive. They're a long time until they get running. And I think new reactors would be a scientific challenge, it would be a technological challenge, it would be a political challenge, and everything. And in principle, one should go for it. However, if there's no chance that we can really use them, it doesn't make sense. So we need the political discussion before. And the political discussion, as I mentioned before, is difficult. And try to find somebody, any company in Germany or even in France that would like to get into new concepts on a big scale. On a research scale, yes, we all do that. But big scale is not really doable because of the enormous costs. And the costs do not come from the technological point, they come essentially from the extreme security and safety requirements and from the unsolved disposal problem that will also cost a lot of money. Counting all that together, this option is not an option for our societies, apart from those who are already in the game. And they continue to be in the game because they see what's happening in other countries. And give you a few more numbers. We are only talking about electricity. Electricity is 20% of the energy use in Germany or in Europe in general. It's only 20%. It will be more in the future, but 20% is the starting point. And 10% of the worldwide electricity production still stems from nuclear power. Nuclear power makes 10%, increasing in absolute numbers, but decreasing in relative numbers, because the energy need increases much faster than anything else. We have all these developing countries that need much more electricity and energy in the future. And 10% is a small number. And 10% times 20% is an even smaller number. So we're talking about a relatively small contribution to the energy system worldwide, but with a very high potential of discussions of problems and so forth. And I think Germany and Central Europe, France, other countries around Belgium, they have a very high standard of scientific and technological knowledge and experience and so forth. Even still today, although we have switched off our activities to quite some extent in the past. But there are other countries in the world who go now for reactors. For example, other countries have 55 reactors in construction, 11 in China, and others in South Korea and so forth. The standards of safety requirements are different from those in Central Europe. And I think this is an issue, a political issue that needs to be solved. So the problem is much larger than what we are discussing here.
Thank you. Anna.
Yes, I think it would be a mistake to think that nuclear is a one-size-fits-it-all solution for the world. So, covering the world with nuclear reactors, this is no issue to discuss. I think there are many countries who can really well afford with renewables. If they have a large hydroelectric dam plus solar plus wind turbines, they can get it. There are many transitional societies in the third world who can really do it with renewables. I'm convinced. But I think for the interesting thing is how to decarbonize the old industrial societies of the global north. And in this part of the world, nuclear has still a role to play. I think if I think that 50%, to have a few numbers, 50% of all low carbon electricity generation in Europe is nuclear, 50%. So it is a decreasing share. That's true due to Germany, for example. But anyway, it is a number to reckon with. And if I consider this question, nuclear safety and reactor concepts in China or Russia, I would say I recently have been in the Bundestag I was invited as an expert on Russian reactors, and so the Baltic German deputies commission wanted to know from me, is this new nuclear power plant in Belarus, is it safe? And I told them no, yes, because if you consider the concept, it is the most modern generation 3+ facility we have, and this Russian new VVR type, and it is in a way with passive safety features. It has more passive safety features than our power plants have, so it is not unsafer than the German ones. The crucial thing is another aspect. It's the larger, and we come again to this ethical problem. It's the question whether you can have a strong nuclear safety culture in a country where you have a dictatorship. Do you have a questioning? Can you afford a questioning attitude at a nuclear power plant if you are living in a dictatorship? This is the question I put for this. I'm more or less convinced that the VVER 1200 is a really good power plant, but I do not know what is going on in a Russian or Belarusian or Chinese power plant if a field operator knows a problem and applies a questioning, or wants to apply a questioning attitude, and is not allowed to by his superiors, because they are living in an overall very highly hierarchized and not very committed to criticism overall system. I think this is the real problem. We should work on that. The technological solutions are not bad, I think, in Russia. So this is my personal, only this insight in Eastern Europe, where I'm really well acquainted with this technology.
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, we're opening more and more, interesting questions, but we are unfortunately running out of time and approaching the end of our discussion. So I've got a last question in mind for all of you, and maybe you can answer quickly or in 1 or 2 sentences. So we were discussing here, let's say on a carpet of rationality. We were hearing the word rationality throughout the discussion. And however, we chose very, very strong emotional words in the name for this evening: utopia and nightmare. So I would like to know, do you think that, the emotional aspects are maybe considered too much or too strongly in the whole debate? What do you think? What do you think? So, who would like to answer that, or who would like to start? Okay, let's start. Okay, which hand was first raised? Okay, Anna. Yeah.
I think emotion is underestimated, and very often the mistake is made in this discussion to denounce emotion as bad. So you are an emotional argument, so it is no argument, you know. And I think, you know, when I did my field studies in nuclear power plant, I did much research on the role of emotion, even in these, you know, nuclear workplaces. And people are really emotionally connected, for example, to their plant, and they have emotional situations when solving conflicts, or when being in a stressful situation and having an accident situation. So to disregard emotion would be a major mistake when discussing nuclear. And I think we should really reconsider or rethink emotion in this discussion, be it emotion within the system of nuclear power, and be it the role of emotions in the overall society discourse. And I think perhaps all of you remember this discussion on radiophobia in Eastern Europe. So many people denounce radiophobia, that is non-existent because all those somatic symptoms are not related to radiation impact. But as a matter of fact, it's consequences of traumatic events for the people. Chernobyl was traumatic for many people. Evacuation is traumatic. So it is a matter of fact that these emotions are in the field, and so we have to discuss them rather than to denounce them. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Benna.
I fully agree with Anna that emotions should be included. And I want to also reject the dichotomy emotional versus rational. So because I think part of the emotions, that emotion is not something that is not by definition irrational. So that's the dichotomy that is very often in engineering mentioned, but also refuted empirically, by the way, in various empirical studies. And I think, and I would like to cite here a colleague of ours, Sabine Ruser, who has done some very fascinating work on including emotions in risky technology. And she argues that in including emotions, we must make sure that we don't go into extremes. Because on the one hand, you could take emotions into account and use them as a reason for rejecting technology altogether. That would be some kind of emotional, that would be some kind of populism in an engineering discussion. That is probably not the favored way of doing it. On the other hand, there is also some emotions on the side of the engineering, some positive emotions in terms of that's an excellent technology that could deal with, that's also an emotional response, by the way, which should also be included, but we shouldn't go to the populism on the one hand or technocracy on the other hand. But somewhere in the middle, we need to make sure, and we need to account for the emotions of the public for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go on with Walter. What do you think?
Certainly have to consider, and we are all
have problems
still
again.
Problems?
Yeah. Maybe.
The video off. Is it better now?
Yes, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and you have seen me. I'm not so beautiful. No, we are all handling emotions, and very emotional. We see it. We like cars, for example. Yeah, because usually are only for driving from one point to the second point. But we love cars, or we do not take into account kind of energy. We have our emotions against it or positively. So we have to take it into account. And I fully agree with my two speakers, with Bernam and Anna, that we have to take it into account. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Eberhard.
Yeah, emotions are always part of the game. Emotion and ratio and emotio belong together. And I don't think there's a discrepancy. We have to take everything into account. However, an important issue is who feeds the emotions, or what are the mechanisms that emotions are stimulated in one or the other way. And I think the public opinion or the published opinion is an important ingredient and explains a lot of what happens in each and every country. And of course, in a top-down country, a part of this is heavily suppressed. Maybe everything is suppressed concerning open discussion. However, in our democratic societies, this discussion is important, and we should have an eye on how we are influenced by various channels. And the former channels like TV or newspapers is one thing, but now we have the social media as an additional influence plane that becomes more and more important. And we need to understand how that works. And if we would like to have a discussion in a certain direction, for example, to revitalize nuclear, then we have to play the game on all channels that are available. And the social media is getting one of the most important channels in the future.
Thank you very much. Armin.
Yes, first, the question whether emotions are considered too much or too less, it's ridiculous because emotions are powerful. Then second, emotions are not arguments per se, but often there are arguments behind. So we have to look deeper and think about them, investigate them, explore them. Often there are diagnoses, observations, experiences behind, which are worthwhile to be considered. And third, it's my hypothesis, sometimes I dare, it just came to my mind, the fall of nuclear in the eyes of German public probably has something to do with too many emotions at the side of the proponents, because they felt to be the experts. They were arrogant at that time in the 1970s and 60s and 80s. I remember some of them, and also the politicians. I remember Franz Josef Strauss saying, oh, well, if anybody opposes nuclear power, he or she wants to go back to the age of stones. This was emotional, not argumentative. So it's not always the case that the opponents are emotional and the proponents are not. And really, Behnam, it was very nice to listen to you because this idea came to my mind while listening to your comment on this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin. Thank you very, very much. And thanks to all of you for this complex discussion and which was very rich in perspectives and helped us a bit, I think, to examine the many shades in the spectrum between nuclear future as utopia or nightmare, how we called it. Thank you very, very much to all of you, and thank you all for watching and discussing with us and being part of this exchange of opinions in this online panel presented by RT Academy for Responsible Research, Teaching and Innovation at KIT. So all that's left to say is have a good night, take good care, and bye-bye.